Hammond here for Half Hour With, and today our Half Hour With is an extraordinary new documentary. Everyone knows Christopher Reeve, but you probably don't know the real story, and it's all laid out in Superman. I have the director, producer, and co-writer, Ian Bonhôte. Hi, Ian.
Very happy to be here. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you for being here. And then director and writer as well on it, Peter Ettedgui. Peter, hi, how are you?
Hi, very well, thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
And congratulations on this movie. It's very exciting. It's going to be in theaters before people will be able to see it streaming and everywhere else. Which is exciting in a big event style, and I think it deserves that too. It began its life, I guess, at Sundance, where it was first seen. But can you, maybe Ian, just give us a quick overview before we show some of it, a quick overview of how this came about and how you two actually got involved with it initially?
Yeah, no problem. We actually got involved not as early as some of the other producers and team members. The project was actually brokered between Daniel Kilroy, an archive, and a producer. We actually got in touch with the family and was looking for some of the archive, and just told them, would you be interested to get involved? And then he got Passion Pictures involved, and one of the producer of the film, Lizzie Gillette, and one of the exec, David Moulton. And then they got in touch with us to see if we were interested in directing. And straight away, we said yes straight away. And I won't lie, we were talking about other potential project, and it was a couple of years after our previous film, Rising Phoenix. But when they got in touch with us, it was a no-brainer for us.
That's great. Well, I want to show a trailer here from the film to give people a real idea of what you two have accomplished here in bringing this to the screen. So here is Superman, the Christopher Reeve story.
Everybody's looking for a hero. I am not a hero. That was a part. I played the part. I'm not that man.
Hands down, he was Superman from day one.
I realized that if I could pull off this part, it would change my life.
John Houseman said, Mr. Reeve, it is very important to become a serious classical actor. Unless, of course, they offer you a load of money to do something else.
He convinced me when I first met him that he would fly.
Doing things with my dad, it was all about activity and action. Riding bikes, playing soccer, skiing.
Carpe diem, Al!
My dad was very competitive, and he didn't necessarily slow down.
We said goodbye, and he gave this wave. That was the last time I saw him on his feet.
Mr. Reeve currently has no movement or spontaneous respiration.
Superman, crazy. Just that simple little thing over the horse.
I'd ruined my life and everybody else's. I won't be able to ski, sail, throw a ball to Will. Won't be able to make love to Dana. Maybe we should let me go.
She came flying in, and she just yelled, "I love you. I love you."
And then she said the words that saved my life. You're still you, and I love you.
He and Robin were such good friends because they could match each other. Robin also had struggles that he dealt with his whole life, and I think that they both were aware of darkness.
Brother Chris is fighting like crazy. When you find people who fight like that but still keep their humanity, that gives you great hope.
That is tough because I can feel him, but he can't feel me.
It must have been hell for my mom, too, knowing what she had lost.
I felt I needed to do something, not just for myself, but for everyone else in the same condition.
The fact that Superman was in a wheelchair and was willing to go public with it was huge.
Help is on the way.
The Christopher and Dana Reeve Paralysis Act.
People are literally walking because of him.
what is a hero? My answer was that a hero is someone who commits a courageous action without considering the consequences. Now my definition is completely different. I think a hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles.
I wouldn't have missed this for the world.
That's amazing. And all that footage, too. I'm always impressed with documentaries, the way you can get all this archival footage and everything that we've never seen before. I mean, so much of this will be new to people. If you think you know Christopher Reeve and his movies and everything, this is a revelation. Peter, you two worked together. You did McQueen, which is the Alexander McQueen story, Rising Phoenix. You have a certain second hand, I'm imagining, as partners in what you do, but your creative vision. Can you talk a little bit about how that worked here on this story, how you came to the same mind of how to tell it?
Well, it's funny, Ian was joking this morning that our first two films were a rehearsal for making this film. There's a certain amount of truth in that, because McQueen was a kind of biographical portrait, as this film is, and Rising Phoenix was very concerned with the disability movement and the struggle for disability human rights, because it's a film about the Paralympic Games. So, in a sense, coming onto this project was sort of like, I wouldn't say it was a fusion of the first two films, but we felt very well prepared for the challenges of making both a biopic and also a film about that really does look at a purpose, at Chris's purpose ultimately, and his activism and his advocacy within the disability community.
And I suppose that's where the title comes in too. It's Super/Man. We are not telling the Superman story. We're telling the story of the man, a Superman in a different way too. How long did it take you to come up with the proper way to frame it? Because titles can be so important for people in this day and age.
We agree. I totally agree with you. And sometimes a massive struggle to get right. But actually, in this case, isn't it, Peter? We came up with it straight away. That was the first thing we decided to do. We knew the film wasn't made with Warner Brother in mind. Warner Brother came later on, and the legacy of Superman and what actually they're doing right now. For us, we were just making a film about Christopher Reeve, who happened to be Superman in 4 movies. That's it. There was no thinking about the future and what's happening right now. But we know that the audiences still know Christopher Reeve as Superman. So the title Superman was really important. So in our mind, how could we just use Superman and still get away with it? And at the same time, there was this element, and at the same time, it's exactly what you said. How can we, because there's 2 stages to his life, and I'm sure you will ask us about how we structured the narrative and the flashback, etc. But we felt that there's almost a before and after the accident. That's not how we tell the story of the film, but there is. So the Superman and that slash, in a way, become that element. And then we came up with the idea to use a sort of kryptonite little line in it, because obviously that's what sadly separated Chris from his previous life and his new life. So there's loads of little meanings with that title, but to tell you the truth, we came up with it almost straight away, isn't it, Peter?
The first time that Ian and I talked about it, Ian said to me, we're going to make a real Superman film. So it was in our minds from the beginning.
Yeah, I find it interesting too. You mentioned you were into it before Warner Brothers, really. I mean, this played at Sundance. I'm not sure of the trajectory, but I believe they announced that they were going to be involved with it after it actually premiered. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, they saw it. Some of the Warner HBO people were at that premiere screening.
Yeah.
Others were given a link that they watched at exactly the same time. Our sales agent was very, very, sort of like, no one should see this film before it has its premiere. So, and then they, there were lots of interested parties, but they came in almost immediately with a very, compelling pitch and sort of like, this film belongs here. This is the home for this film, which of course it is, because,
Well, it also makes it easier in terms of access to what you need too, in terms of their legacy of Superman and all of that.
And the archive.
And the archive, exactly. And of course, a key component here is the family. This doesn't get made without them and these kids. And of course, everybody I think now knows Will Reeve. He's on Good Morning America and everything, but all of them were in. Can you talk about their involvement and why they've chosen you and trusted you? Because I know in reading up on it that there was an initial big trust factor that came out and made them comfortable putting this in your hands.
I mean, straight away when we were first initially when we got approached and we were very interested, and we started to talk about the structure and how we, Peter and I, would actually approach the film, we got on a Zoom call. And I think that Zoom call, that was even before we met physically, we got on very, very well. Matthew and Alexandra's mom is British, English. And so they've got a very strong connection to England. I do not, everybody will realize that I've got a very thick French accent, but after 27 years on this good old island, I feel almost more British than probably most of the British. Anyway, but we had a very, we got on very well. And then we met them in New York physically. And I remember Peter and I, we were, a little bit coy and shy to start with. And we just realized that the three of them embodied a part of Chris. And the way we shared what we wanted to do and the way we were hearing them, what they wanted the film to do for their father. It wasn't an iconographical film. They didn't want to put their father on a pedestal. They felt that him, Dana, and Summer Gay, the way they got raised, the way the foundation came about, all of the energy, the goodwill, and the struggle their family went through, they felt they were ready to share that with the world. And we felt that with our own, emotional states and our own ideas of how you live your life, it felt really, really good to actually bring that to the screen. And we felt really, really, it was a really good opportunity, and they really trusted us from the start.
Yeah, that's so good. And they're all interviewed here, and they're really very compelling interviews. They really give a different aspect on it. I found not just Will, who's used to being in front of the camera and everything, but all of them from their perspective here, Peter.
Yeah, they really did. I mean, it's interesting because as Ian was saying, when we first met them, they each sort of, Alexandra is the activist. She works in DC. She's very much continuing that part of Chris's legacy. Will, as you've pointed out, is a performer and presenter. And Matthew is this sort of like very reflective, creative soul. And each of those things embody important aspects of Christopher's personality. So I think we felt when we were preparing the interviews that we could really sort of channel that a little bit, and that we would bring Christopher to life, sure, in the archive and all of that, but also very much through these three beautiful children who, were really talking on screen. I mean, as about their father for the first time. And each of those interviews was, they were very, incredibly heartfelt days. I mean, each interview took a day. And there were the first three things that we shot were each of those interviews.
Oh, is that right?
And I won't lie. I mean, we were all in pieces. Everybody on the crew was in tears and at various points, and because they really brought their father to life in such a powerful way. And as Ian says, it was never about putting them on a pedestal. So they do talk about the more difficult aspects of their relationship with their father, the split with his first partner, with Gay, the mum of the two oldest kids, things like that. It was very sort of, nothing was off the table. And we'd all agreed that beforehand. But
And at the
yeah,
same time, they never wanted to, they didn't want to censor us creatively. So they gave us the interview and then they let us do it. And I think that's something that was very important for us, is that we put it right in front of them at the start when we first talked, is that let us get on with it. Let us try to find something. I'm sure you talk to huge amount of documentary maker. There's a certain amount you plan and you think about initially at the beginning of the project, but the project evolved massively in the edit. And you have to be careful not to show things too early. You need to share things, and obviously financial want to see things, and or potential distributors, but you have to be really careful because you still look yourself for the story, and the story, it's like raw material that you keep on growing. And we're always worried, and I think it's not out of control freakness, but we're worried that cuts going too early could give the wrong idea, because if we're not happy with it, for sure they're not going to be happy with it. Do you see what I mean? We need to really feel we got to a stage where it's not a question about presentable. It's got the right emotional narrative and it's got the right structure in terms of the beats.
Yeah. And of course, you mentioned Gay briefly there, Peter Gay Exon, who was the mother of two, and very prominent in this film too. Talk about her involvement, because I thought it was really fascinating actually to listen to her.
Well, the funniest thing is, I mean, we said to the kids early on, we really do need to meet your mum. And they said, well, she'll never do an interview. She's never done an interview. In fact, we found archive of Chris talking about Gay himself and saying she just never does interviews. So we kind of thought, there's no chance she's going to be in this film, but we would still like to meet her.
Peter, let's be true. We thought maybe with working hard in our charm, we might get there. Let's be true. We're on a true. We only half an hour, so now we can share it.
We met her on Zoom with Alexandra the first time. Then we went for lunch with her in London, and I think gradually she got to see us and trust us in the same way as the kids, and agreed. And it was I don't want to use the same words about it being a moving and kind of authentic interview, but she is just very sincere. And I think, the lovely thing about this film is that it has not just Christopher and his wonderful heroic story, and not just three wonderful children, but also two really quite beautiful love stories.
Yeah.
And everyone always talks about Dana's story, which is extraordinary. And, in the trailer that you've just depicted, that moment where she, kind of persuades Christopher that there is still something to live for. You're still you.
Yeah.
That's just a lovely moment. But Gay is very much not thought about so much as a result. And, her story, I think why we felt it was particularly important to have her was not just because she's the mother of the two oldest children, but because, her romance blossomed as the first Superman film was made. So she was really the witness of that whole period, of the excitement and the craziness of going from being an obscure, unknown actor to becoming the first great cinematic superhero.
Yeah.
And there's as well, she represented a dark moment within his life. She represented the time where actually the career was going downhill, self-doubt came along, and a sort of emotional rejection of the closest people to you. And I think after meeting Matt and Al, you could see that obviously at different level and in different ways, it had affected them. So we wanted to meet her and anyway talk about it. And I think in the case of Gay, was very much like a way for her to put closure to a relationship she hadn't quite finished on her own terms.
Yeah.
You would have to ask her exactly, but I feel that it allowed her to say bye to Christopher, because in a way she's, I don't want to spoil anything, but she's one of the survivor, at least from him. And she's still the mother of two of his great children. Do you see what I mean? She's forever embodied within his story.
And it is bittersweet when you look at this film too, and look at not just what happened to Christopher Reeve, then what happened to Dana Reeve, just like heartbreaking, and also Robin Williams, who is his closest friend, very significant, I think, throughout this film to show that and how important he was to Will in particular throughout this, and the footage that you got was perfectly used throughout this to demonstrate that, since you didn't have obviously Robin here.
I
We were
think,
very happy.
yeah, I think what we realize as well is when you make a documentary, many people might have passed, but that doesn't mean you need to let them out. You can actually create a portrait. You can bring them to life through archive, as well as in the case of the two people you mentioned, Chris and Dana. And Robin was obviously an essential character. And very kindly through Will, Marsha, we got to talk to Marsha Williams, and we hopefully became friendly. And she obviously didn't want to talk on camera, but she was ready to share things because she really wanted to celebrate Chris and Robin's story.
He gave us some, you know, absolutely beautiful archive of the two of them together. Not a lot, but the moments that we had were just like, they were just perfect to kind of capture their friendship after the accident, and the role that Robin played in Chris and the whole family's life.
So amazing. Can you talk about putting this film together, the structure, how you go back and forth, the flashbacks, and the way you approached it, moving into this, to the work of the foundation, which is so important. And this film will do a lot in many ways, but it will also keep Christopher Reeve alive in that respect of what he did with what happened to him for the betterment of everybody.
I mean, you know, the thing is that there are two stories in this film. One is Christopher's life before the accident, so those first 42 years, and then the other is the 9 years following the accident. And from the very beginning, we knew that we were going to have to be very careful how we told the story. That if you took it on a cradle to grave, typical biographical journey in a very linear way, it just wouldn't work. For a number of reasons, not least of all that visually you were going to have an action man for the first half of the film, and then somebody who's in a wheelchair for the rest of the film. So we felt it was really essential that we sort of interwove those stories, and we took our cue a little bit from Christopher's own memoir, where he does that. You know, he starts pretty much with the accident. And that's how we started. We kind of felt we had to sort of start with the accident and then follow there's a really beautiful narrative journey from the pit of despair to something that is, you know, it ends tragically with his death, as you've alluded to, but there's also something very uplifting because he achieves so much in those 9 years. He goes from somebody who doesn't have anything to live for to someone who is, you know, a true hero in life rather than on the screen, and becomes such an important sort of advocate, advocate for disabled people, but also an activist galvanizing the scientific and medical community to search for a cure. And out of that quest came the foundation, really, which is like a sacred trust, really. I mean, he built this pretty much from scratch. There had been an American Paralysis Association. He developed that into the Christopher Reeve Foundation. It then became the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, whose motto very beautifully is tomorrow's cure, today's care, which really sums up Dana and Chris's sort of like their work and what they each embodied. And then obviously with Dana's death, it passed into the hands of the children, who really took it on, knew how important it was that the Reeve name continued to be attached to this incredibly important work.
Was there anything that you wished you could have put in the film that you didn't? Was it difficult in the editing to pare it down? And was there anything, in other words, you saw that, I don't know, we want to tell a story, but this just doesn't quite fit in, but that maybe we'll have the extras later on, or things that you didn't use? I don't know.
At least for me, but what became apparent is the film was, you know, despite it's a retrospective documentary about someone who passed, the fact that children are so active and so present nowadays, and they've got their own story going on, we feel that the film is almost a contemporary film.
Yeah.
And we felt that structuring the film, the start with the three children, and then finishing with the three children, which actually makes the film unfinished because he goes on, there's a seed of hope, there's a seed of power being placed. And the fact that what you give to your children can be way stronger than just a legacy of a filmography or potentially money or anything like this. It's very the simple value of truth, justice, and the American way. Sorry, that was a joke, but of truth, and actually making you weigh in life and choosing the right versus the wrong, that actually we saw within the kids. But there's one bit that potentially Peter want to talk about.
Well, it's, the thing is, there are things, of course, we regret. I mean, there's the beautiful stories in the interviews that we couldn't include, wonderful moments. And so, yeah, there's a lot. I suppose the one thing that Ian is alluding to is, before his accident and after the final Superman film, Chris got very involved in politics at that point. He'd always been a great idealist, I think, in his life, but he got actively involved in the National Endowment for the Arts. He got actively involved in early environmental activism and also in human rights activism. He was asked to travel to Chile to help some actors who had been, threatened with death under the Pinochet regime for their own sort of like beliefs, and it was felt that if someone like Chris could come to Chile and speak up for these actors, that would have a huge effect on the international stage, and in fact, it did. I was told that it helped precipitate the famous referendum which resulted in Pinochet being chucked out of power.
Wow.
But that's a wonderful story, and I always felt, I think I won't say I think we always felt it's a great story and we have to have that in there. And our archive researcher did the most amazing, she sort of actually found people who had helped Christopher during that journey, because he traveled by himself. I mean, there was no security or anything else like that. He was actually it was slightly sort of like a dangerous thing to do. And later, our archive producer, she tracked down people who knew him from that period, who had footage and so on. So we had a lovely sequence, but it was just too much. It was really, we wanted to focus on the activism after the accident. So all you really needed to do was allude to the fact that he had been an activist.
Yeah. What is it you hope audiences take away from this film when they see it? What's your big hope for it?
I think it's a very positive and hopeful ride. I really think that people can go as a big group. It's a family film. It's not an age-limited film. And I think it's about revisiting the true value of certain people that are still worth celebrating to this day.
I think that's perfectly said. And I want to thank both of you for joining us here today on Half Hour with the movie Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. Don't miss it.